Let's go now to our friend Bimnet Abibi from Galaxy Trading. As always, Bimnet, thanks for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
So Fed Day, but they declined to hike. So it's a skip.
Unchanged, yes.
But what did they say?
So a couple of things. They kept rates as is, and they increased their forecast for where interest rates are likely to be at the end of 2024.
So even
known as
higher
the dot plot.
for longer?
Correct. Yes.
Even
so
higher.
they reiterated the message of higher for longer via their tools of forward guidance, which is encapsulated by the dot plot.
Yeah.
It went from a median dot of about 4.6 in 2024 at the end of 24 to about 5.1.
So
decent. And it surprised the market in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I think that was by intention. And I think what the Fed is basically trying to assess is, the last leg of inflation is really tough to beat. And if market expectations get too ahead of themselves, it would actually be counter-cyclical or counterfactual to what they're trying to do. So they're perpetually in the stance of we need to make sure that the market's surprised, they believe us, our credibility is high. And so you even saw during the press conference, Powell kind of reiterate, that kind of messaging. I will, however, caveat that, Powell said unknown so many different times, during,
the
press
word
conference.
unknown? The
word unknown. I mean, there are just so many variables with respect to energy prices. The world of post-COVID is very different than pre-COVID, supply chains, et cetera, how the labor market is structured, the fiscal stimulus. There's so many unknowns, and it's such a dynamic economy that it's really tough for them to even believe in their forecasts. And that was the other thing that the Fed sort of made a point on today. They increased their expectations for growth in 23 and 24 and 25.
Wow.
While, I think their unemployment stuff, kind of stayed the same, around 4% unemployment for 24, 4.1% for, 25.
Yep.
But their core PCE estimates, moved lower.
Which is their inflation target.
Which was their inflation target. And so they're telling you that they're going to get to their inflation target without really harming employment that much in the forecasts, and that they're going to be higher for longer. And so that was the data that, was given to the market.
Which is a soft landing scenario, right?
Soft landing-ish. Absolutely. But again, you just realize that he's just stuck in such a tricky situation. Personally, I have found more confidence in some of the more dovish elements of the data that I've been seeing recently, and just from anecdotal bits of evidence. I do think things are slowing, and that this could ultimately kind of be the last sort of big hawkish surprise, or not big, but moderately hawkish surprise from the Fed in a while. And I think that's kind of supported by the price action that you've seen in the market. So if you look at 2-year yields, they sold off and got to 5.15. But if you look at something like the 5-year yield or the 7-year yield or the 10-year yield, it was basically unchanged on the day, give or take a couple basis points. Don't know where we are right now, but S&P, last I checked, we were down 50 basis points on the day. And more
not
and more.
Not too big a deal. Bitcoin is down 1%, right, or something like that.
Yeah, it's down 1%.
We're in the high 26s, though. It feels it's mostly the same.
Mostly the same.
Yeah.
And so, with the current state of, where interest rate expectations are and the amount of money in the system and, growth that's projected and, what we know now, the Fed didn't really rock the boat.
Yeah.
Per se. And it's really tough for them to rock the boat because we know that they're data dependent.
Yeah.
And we have high frequency data points.
Right.
And so
you're primarily seeing the same data they're seeing. Primarily.
Yes.
Right.
And so it's a matter of is your reaction function that you think of the Fed's reaction function the same as the one that they have for themselves?
So the surprise was the higher dot plot at the end of next year, but that's relatively small of a surprise in the scheme of things. It wasn't a surprise hike or a surprise cut or anything like that. It wasn't dramatic or a huge shift in language.
It was a lack of an additional cut or
a skip. It's interesting. They are in that rock and a hard place, but
rock and a hard place.
This
That's
isn't
how
the
I'd
Super
put it.
Bowl. We said big day, Fed day, but this is more like a wild card game or something at this point.
Yeah.
It's not like the fireworks we were
I feel
seeing.
like we were insulting wild card
It's not,
games.
I know. It's not like the fireworks we were seeing earlier in the year.
Yeah, it's just quite telling. I mean, it just shows you where we are in the cycle.
Just chugging
You're
along
closer to the end rather than the beginning, and there's less surprises from the monetary policy side of things, and there are probably more surprises that are going to come from the actual hard data and economic data series.
Other thing to bring up here that could affect all markets is a looming potential government shutdown.
Yep.
I think next week's episode will be right up on when the date actually hits. I think it's basically October 1st. So we'll know more next week as to but it seems increasingly likely that the U.S. government will fail to be funded on time and will close. I think the last time it was closed for 35 days. That it did close. So it could be an impact, right? I mean, that on the country in the scheme of things.
I mean, totally possible. I think it's just it's more likely than not to happen.
It appears.
But in terms of the impact, again, it's tough. Those federal employees, they're still gonna get paid. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
And the federal contractors, et cetera, you're not gonna get paid now, but government will reopen.
What about certain services? Is there not downstream?
Certain services will definitely. I mean, the Fed was actually talking about it today in terms of they might not get certain data series for
the Department of Labor is closed
correct.
or something.
Bureau
right?
of Labor Statistics
Or
whatever. Yeah. It's and so they'll just have to make decisions without those bits of data. But again, the high frequency stuff is so good these days that it's do we really need the Bureau of Labor Statistics to calculate a number that they've been doing the same way for 40 years?
Just anecdotally, you watching it, how often does BLS data have dramatic difference though? Dramatic difference though from the other data? When you get official unemployment versus the payroll data or whatever, it's usually relatively in line, right?
It tells the same story.
Yeah,
where it's
typically.
in the same
It'd be pretty rare
generally.
to see them diverge dramatically, right?
Well, where we really had the biggest diversion was I would say a year to 18 months ago when people saw rents going up 12, 15%.
And CPI.
And the CPI number was stuck at 6 or something or 7 or 8 annualized, and it's on what planet was that data
where did that data come from?
That's just not real.
Yeah.
And you can see it on the Street Easy data.
So there can be some divergence, but yes.
But
so not a huge impact even on data, although maybe one. And you're saying, I don't know, just generally not a giant market event. If we have it's really just how long it's closed for, right? That matters,
I think that's kind of the biggest implication.
This would, I would assume. I mean, I think the first time the U.S. was ever downgraded was by S&P during a shutdown. In 2011 or something like that. I forget the exact. I think it was after the Great Financial Crisis. And Fitch just downgraded the U.S. over the summer.
For
and
political
so if
dysfunction.
And if so, this would only give further credence to that dysfunction.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, all Congress. I mean, I don't mean this to be offensive, but essentially, they just show up and they spend money we don't have. Right?
That's what they've been doing for a long time.
Really long time.
Yeah.
And it's based on the premise that the U.S. can just print money endlessly.
And our debt is over $30 trillion now, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue. It's not an issue. It might not be an issue for 5 years. It might not be an issue for 10 years.
It's almost guaranteed to be an issue.
But it will be such a big issue
at some point
down the line that it's just irresponsible what we're doing. At the same time, you could have folks counter being well, if you think it's that serious, then maybe it's serious enough to shut down the government and force people to the table.
This is what's happening.
And I respect that thought, but given the nature of the discourse that we have and how polarized, the two parties are in the nation, it's just tough to get to a pragmatic solution,
right? And
to even agree on the facts to debate.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. No, it's a precarious political situation. I agree.
Exactly,
Very
which is why the downgrade, is probably justified.
Right. I mean, I think we're all witnessing how divided the country is.
Yeah.
And a house divided against itself really cannot stand. So, I hope just broadly something gives way in this political dynamic. I think everyone hopes something.
I personally,
doesn't mean we don't care about each side. Groups don't have their own issues they care about and advocate for, but the solution can't be just turn off the government, like, right?
Exactly.
To your point, I understand how they get to that, like, that play in the game, but like let's hope we can look. The first time I think it ever happened was basically like only 10 years ago. This is not something that's normal in American history, but it's become normalized now, and that's a sign of how dysfunctional it is. Well, look, we'll have more info on that next week, I think, as we get closer to the potential shutdown. So we'll talk more about it then.
We're on shutdown watch.
Bimnet Abibi from Galaxy Trading, my friend. Thanks for joining Galaxy Brain.
Pleasure.